Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the AltMed podcast. If you're liking what you're listening to and maybe watching, if you're on YouTube, please remember to hit like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you will get the latest episodes as they drop. With me, as always, my co-host, Mitch Kurtz.
G'day, Trusty.
Mitch.
Hello. Good to be back.
And we are absolutely thrilled today to have one of the biggest players, if not the biggest, in the medicinal cannabis space in Australia. We have the CEO of Cann Group Limited, Mr. Peter Crock. Peter, welcome.
G'day, guys. Andrew, Mitch, good to be with you.
Absolute pleasure to have you.
It's it's been actually you've been one of the guests we've been keen to get on for a little while now. So we're thrilled to be unpacking so much of what Cann Group's doing and your pioneering role in the industry. So perhaps before we get to some of that, you can give us just an overview of your career to date, your experiences, and sort of what brought you across to the medicinal cannabis industry.
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride, and over 5 years now in the industry, which we often talk about cannabis years being like dog years. It seems like a very long time, but it was an interesting segue into my background with new farm and agricultural chemicals and various roles over the years there. But having just finished a 28-year career there, and not long after Doug Rathbone had left, and he actually joined the board of Cann Group, and the chairman, Alan McCallum, and Doug asked me to come and have a chat to them about the opportunity in this space where they were looking for someone to come in, and Cann was heading down the track early on of going to an IPO and being involved early on in the piece. So I joined when there were only about 4 of us, so early days of Cann, and before or just after the ODC had been announced, the legislation for the Office of Drug Control came into effect in February 2016. I joined in April 2016 and focused early on in the piece in getting licenses. The day that the ODC opened for business, the 30th of October, we had our 2 license applications in that day, and were first to come out the other end of it. And then led on into an IPO where the ASX, we were the first to be listed through the front door. So they wouldn't let us list until we had a license, which we got early in 2017 and started that path. So it's been an exciting ride and interesting time, starting from the very start.
And did the last 5 years feel longer than the first 28 years at New Farm? How does it all compare?
It's funny, it's all a bit of a blur. So look, it's been terrific, and to be involved in an industry from the very start. We've been instrumental in helping set up the industry body MCIA as well, and providing a voice back to the regulators through that pathway, as well as being the first through the front door with licenses. It's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, and that sitting as the chair of MCIA, I think there's a lot of people that listen that don't really understand the dialogue that industry and the regulator has. I would love to just, if you could, kind of a summary or a brief kind of description of how that interacts. I'd love to understand that a bit more from the MCIA perspective.
Yeah, it's important that, and it is interesting in terms of being the first license holder. Our facility in an undisclosed location in Melbourne is probably the most visited cannabis facility in all of Australia by the Office of Drug Control. They used us as a guinea pig. We have hosted a lot of their inspectors as they were getting trained and brought online, particularly in the first years. But talking to the likes of the ODC or the TGA, when you're wearing an industry association hat, it's a very different dialogue, and they are keen to have a voice of industry that they know is independent of any individual company. And so early on in the piece, there were 6 of us that were license holders that came together and understood that we needed to work collectively to provide a feedback loop to the regulators and and also to the industry in terms of things like setting up a code of conduct and giving new entrants into an industry, some guidelines to work to and understand what the requirements are to ensure there's trust and accountability within the industry. And that's been an important role for us to play, and having that voice back to the regulator where we've been able to provide feedback, again, without the regulator fearing undue influence from any single commercial operator, is part of the role that we've played.
Interesting. Yeah, because when we're out there in the kind of the frontiers of the medical cannabis space at the moment, you do hear some of the consumers, some of the patients, saying, "Oh, it's big pharma. They're only acting in their own interest, and it's all kind of a bit of a rort." And I think there's a bigger picture at play that there's going on here, and to hear that the regulator has that conversation with companies that like Cann and other listed companies and other big operators, I think there is a bit of confusion around that. So, yeah.
Yeah, look, I think, and a good example around that of, one of the key achievements that we had in the last 12 months was around the down scheduling of CBD and the S3 pathway opening up. The TGA originally came out and said that, or put forward that there be a daily limit of 60 milligrams as the daily dose limit. And
yeah,
it was through work that the MCIA commissioned, working with the Lambert Initiative and Professor Ian McGregor. We collectively worked with them to put together a submission and had the TGA revise that to 150 milligrams a day. The idea of providing a pathway to patients remains our primary focus. Yes, we've got to be able to do it in a way that's commercially sustainable, but it's not all about big pharma. And in fact, it's almost the opposite, in that the environment that we're working in, the special access scheme and the pathway we've got is a really exciting area to be in, where we haven't been forced down the traditional pharmaceutical development pathway, which we know costs hundreds of millions of dollars and probably would see you in about 10 years' time with a registered product if we were forced back to square one with this process. So the important part of us, though, ensuring that we've got an environment that can be trusted by patients and doctors, and the pathway for cannabinoids, and this is a new class of compound for medicine in Australia and around the world. There are some parts of that we can't cut corners on, and everyone would have heard about GMP, good manufacturing practice, and how that underpins the requirements for Australia. We absolutely subscribe to that, in terms of that is at the core of it, gives us confidence for patients and doctors that they know what they're getting, and that's why that comes with, yes, there's a regulatory overlay and a workload and cost that comes with it, but at the end of the day, it really is to everyone's benefit that we put that in place and we can work to it. So yeah, that's our
thank you, Peter. I am one of the we've had a few guests previously that have raised how in those early days of when they were figuring out how to legislate medicinal cannabis access, that perhaps it should have been treated as a complementary medicine. I don't know, were you ever privy to those discussions, or how do you think it would go? Do you think it is necessary that you have to see a doctor and obtain a prescription? Just curious on your thoughts on that.
There's no doubt that it's a grey area or a wide area that has the ability to go all the way back into complementary medicines. But in setting the bar where it's been set, we think it is appropriate that it gives us a framework to work to, and a structure that allows us to get the confidence around what we need to deliver.
Yeah, and that topic you just raised around good manufacturing practice, we've seen quite a few listed companies invest very heavily in GMP approved facilities. Often, these are the types of, the highest pharmaceutical grade labs that you have suction doors and everyone wearing PPE in certain parts of the facility.
That's just COVID.
That's just COVID, is it? Yeah. Sort of looks like somewhere that might be manufacturing mRNA vaccines. But people might look at that and say, well, hang on, why can't people just home grow cannabis? Why does it need to go through a sterile lab facility in order for us to have that product made available to Australian patients? Do you have any thoughts on the importance of GMP or anything related?
Yeah, I think bringing it in under that requirement gives us clarity and confidence in the product. So yes, of course, it can be grown at home and processed, through some fairly low tech pathways, and historically with prohibition, there's been a push that saw that as the only way for people to access it for a long time. So yes, it is taking it to another level, but in doing so, I think it is going to open up this as an area of medicine that really will be significant for the welfare and well-being of people. So I think whilst it could be brought through other pathways, the benefits that GMP brings in establishing and allowing us to get set up and give doctors and patients confidence is what it's all about.
Yeah, I think you kind of see that when you think about the types of countries where you want your sterile or medical products to come from. You might be more inclined to take something that comes from Switzerland, for example, than potentially, I don't want to list any countries. I don't want to put any on the spot, but other parts of the world, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's where Australia has punched above its weight for a long time. So Australian standards and the TGA stamp of approval on GMP here really is gold standard. Probably shouldn't use those terms these days in COVID times, but yeah, it's definitely we're up there on a global scale, and we've seen that already in terms of we always knew in Australia with a small patient base and where we're starting from, setting up at scale was going to be important across the board, and that's why exports were seen as important from early stages. Really, all of that though is focused on getting it to a globally competitive and cost-effective system that will have benefits to Australian patients. But in doing so, it has opened up important markets into other parts of the world. And what we have seen there is that this whole area, it's one of those things easy to say, hard to do, and ensuring that there's continuity of supply and repeat supply available through pathways is what we're focused on, and being able to do that and set up to do that. It's clearly a big issue here in Australia and elsewhere around the world, continuity of supply and knowing that you could have certainty of repeat prescriptions and know that you're getting the same product next time round is what all of this leads to, and gives us the wherewithal to deliver against that.
The continuity of supply, that's definitely something I want to come back to you on from a genetics perspective as well. But in terms of, I just want to finish off this GMP piece, because I know you'll have a perspective that is probably more informed than most around that idea of the different standards that local and overseas products are held to in terms of that GMP. I'm sure that you'll have some thoughts on that, and I would love to hear them.
Yeah, look, in reality, when you do get into the pharmaceutical space, GMP is GMP. So you'll hear a lot of talk about EU GMP. In fact, good manufacturing. Yeah, and CGMP, that's just continuous GMP, good manufacturing practice. So it's a journey that continues forever. You don't get to an end point and say, I've made it and it stops here. That's why it's the little C in front of it means it's continuous. But Australian requirements and the way that TGA regulates around it is world standard. So it's up there with the EU, Canadians, the UK, the FDA are their own special beast. That's known. They don't acknowledge anyone else. But again, it is underpinned by GMP. But as far as the rest of the regulatory world goes, there is consistency across them that our Australian standards will allow us to play in those other parts of the world. And you're right, there are certain jurisdictions where the GMP does come with a question mark over it as to are you getting what you're really getting. So Australia helped lead the way in terms of what's expected around the world.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. And before we move on, sorry, my last one is just TGO93. And I'm sure for some of our listeners, they're thinking this has turned into a regulatory deep dive, but it's what we're really getting at is quality of medicinal cannabis products in Australia. And I know that when the TGA introduced Therapeutic Goods Order 93, which is the standard for medicinal cannabis, that sets the limits on what the allowable or detected amounts of certain dangerous substances would be in cannabis. And these include pesticides, ochratoxin, ash, these sorts of things. I'm just curious. We know that imports, any medicinal cannabis product supplied in Australia must meet that standard, and then therefore be safe. But what do you say to the proposition that all medicines shouldn't have to meet GMP and they should only have to comply with that quality standard that was issued by the TGA? Why the need for these multi-million-dollar labs?
Yeah, look, TGA 93 was put in as an interim measure, and the regulator has sort of been learning on the way through in terms of what to do with this. So I think it was only ever expected to be a sort of an interim measure, and it did give patients in Australia access to product when we didn't have the wherewithal to produce it locally. The real issue around TGO 93 and the TGA are stepping into a process where they're going to make GMP a requirement as part of that. They're doing they have to do a review and various steps under the legislation to enact that change. But in doing so, it will bring us to a level where everything being received into Australia for patients to use here will be of the same standard, and that really is important. So at the moment, it's confidence is undermined with some of the product coming in that doesn't, doctors don't expect to have to try and work out to what quality standard is this product meeting, and is it appropriate for them to prescribe or not. So the idea of the requirements of imports meeting the same standard and the sponsors who are bringing the product in being held to account on that's the change that's going to come through. So yes, it makes sense that any medicinal cannabis product in Australia, once it's gone through that process, would be known to be of the same standard. That's what patients are looking for, and that's what doctors are looking for.
Yeah, it's really quite an interesting area. I think that as we progress, it'll also be interesting to see whether or not that GMP standard is rolled out for compounded products. I know the TGA has spoken a little bit about that as well. So that in effect, as you say, the level playing field would be no matter if your medicine is compounded, imported, produced domestically, it all has to meet that highest pharmaceutical grade of manufacturing.
Compounding one's interesting for me because there's no other product that is held to those types of regulations in compounding, actually.
Yeah, and I think just slipping my MCIA hat on, we had a board meeting yesterday, and we're speaking to Minister Hunt's advisor around this topic, around all of these issues. And I think the compounding one is one that they won't take it through to the full GMP standard because, as you say, Mitch, it doesn't. It's not required for anything else that pharmacists compound. So, but that I think they will look at bringing it in under the special access scheme so that there's some review of what's being done. So I think where they were really focused around the compounding side was where there were some operators who were taking it to the extent of compounding it in bulk, which is not what that process is meant to be.
Yeah,
and so I think bringing that in under the special access scheme is where it will end up with the right controls, but I don't think they'll be layering GMP on top of that because it's inconsistent with how compounding pharmacists work. So and that's part of the feedback loop where we've been talking to and working with the regulators. They're taking a pragmatic approach to this where they can, and understanding the implications so that we don't end up with a system that's lopsided one way or the other and has medicinal cannabis sitting out or causing issues that are inconsistent with how they're working in other areas.
Excellent.
I think it's actually been quite a technical discussion thus far. I know there's listeners that'll be listening in that want to know, when do we get to the juicy stuff? What types of products?
Sorry, who says regulation isn't juicy?
Well, for lawyers like yourself, they are, but for laymen like me, we like to know about the products, the strains, things like that. With what you can tell us, what is on the horizon for Cann Group in terms of
I think we're looking at it, aren't we?
Yeah, it's actually in the background. Yeah, it looks really good thus far, although it could be a little bit greener on the floor, I think, for some people's imagination.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, this is our facility up near Mildura, which that photo's only a few weeks old, and the construction project is coming along really well. Look, it's super exciting in terms of what we're going to be able to do and take the work we've already done. So, we haven't been sitting on our hands for 5 years. We've been producing product and making that available to Australian patients, and also exporting some product. So we're setting everything up, but what is on the horizon around the ability to produce in a facility like this, combined with what's come through our research program with Agriculture Victoria, La Trobe University, the precinct we're working in down here, and the capability that's in Australia, it is world leading. So the genomics work we're doing and the accelerated breeding program, how that's going to translate into some really interesting products coming through a facility like this, where we can produce at scale, reproducibly, but also take it into product forms at the other end of it. In the last year, we completed the Satifarm acquisition, which brought us a new technology platform that is really exciting and will take us into a delivery of cannabinoids in a capsule in a form that looks more like a medicine that doctors normally prescribe. So that's going to be exciting. But drilling in behind that in terms of what we can bring with the genetics into that sort of program, it's really exciting frontier ahead of us as we bring that through.
Yeah, well, there's the over-the-counter is certainly something that I expect to see Cann being one of, if not the first to sort of be in that space, which is, I think, going to be a bit of a game changer. But I wanted to talk about the genomics research that's going on. So you have a partnership with Agriculture Victoria, and I assume a lot of that research activity is under wraps, but at a very high level, is it? Are you exploring different strains, terpenes, flavonoids? Where's the area of interest?
Yeah, a lot of the work to date has really been setting up the foundation that we can leverage and take forward with, particularly when we get into a facility like this, being able to take research onto an industrial scale is going to be exciting. The work we've done with them to date, or in fact a parallel, AgVic in the dairy industry have had a huge impact in terms of their capability there, and it's going to run a close parallel where here, or at the moment, they have every dairy animal in Australia is on their genetic database, and they can take a DNA hair sample from a tail of a bull calf at 6 weeks of age and tell you within 1% what its progeny are going to produce on a daily basis in terms of protein, fat.
Wow.
And the capability and the big data element of what comes behind what we're doing is where that's going to be world leading. From the early days where we had a lot of interaction with the Canadians when they came down and saw what we had available here in terms of that technology. And actually, I don't know that the Canadian Ag Department yet recognised cannabis as a crop. They saw what we were doing down here and realised we were going to have a capability that would be world leading. So we talk a lot about THC and CBD as the two key components, but the entourage effect, which we know is code for there's something else in there, but we can't exactly tell you what it is that's making the difference. The big data element of what we can do in tracking through from plant all the way to patient and looking at patient response to the cannabinoids. And I often refer to them as trace cannabinoids as opposed to minor cannabinoids. It's really exciting to think what we'll be able to do with that as we go forward.
That's very interesting. So are you saying that essentially you'll be able to take a plant and trace almost like reverse ancestry that plant and find out where it came from?
It's more what we can look at is of all of the material that's in production. And it's interesting, most medicinal cannabis is grown by clonal propagation. So we're literally cloning plants, and once you've selected a line and you know what you want to work with, it's keeping that purity and certainty of supply clear. Going back and growing from seed is a bit like a shotgun approach where you can plant 1,000 seed and the variability that comes with that. For us to be able to take 1,000 seeds, put them into production, take a leaf sample, a couple of weeks into the plant's life cycle, where we will know whether it sits within or outside the range that we normally produce in. That's where you'll get the accelerated breeding program coming in, where you can, out of those 1,000 plants, select 10 and take them through in entirety, and then start with another 1,000 plants behind it. So it's that sort of work that will be done that lets you know whether you're playing within the same, whether you've got something novel and different in there. In terms of down the track, looking at how patients respond to products that have come out of a particular strain is another one that sits out there as a holy grail. That one's a bit harder to work through, but definitely sits ahead of us as something that we can work on.
Wow. So you essentially are saying that you'll be able to 2 weeks in, take a sample from the leaf and tell what minor cannabinoid or terpene profile that plant would have by the time it flowers. Is
it's heading down that sort of track where you can say, wow, this is either the same as what we're already growing, or it sits somewhere else and could be of interest to us. So there are times where you want to know that it is the same as what you're doing, and there's times where we're actually looking for that point of difference to take us in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating, actually. Very interesting. When we're talking about the different product formats, for example, capsules or sublingual or any of the different types of products that are just emerging almost every day, especially overseas, soft drinks and cosmetics and all sorts of stuff. But what do you say when you look at the data and you see there's a huge resurgence in just raw flour, basically, or I'd like to say raw, irridated, but flour nonetheless?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that we've seen that pattern emerge in a number of markets where those who are comfortable with accessing cannabis and using it in that form, largely smoked, there absolutely is a huge user base who are comfortable with using it in that fashion, and that's where a legal pathway opening up where people can access it and know that they're getting something that isn't loaded with heavy metals and aflatoxins or something else. It absolutely makes sense that accessing it through a medical pathway gives them confidence and they can do it legally. So yes, we've seen it in the Canadian market really grew from that to start with. So that's probably the poster child of that sort of, even through to today. I think the largest proportion of cannabis used in Canada for medical purposes is still smoked. So yes, you will see an interest in it in that form, but definitely in Australia, you won't find any doctor who would suggest that smoking is the right way to take medicine. And so providing it in a form where doctors can have confidence in what they're prescribing and it looks like something they normally would is where there's still a really important role for developing products in other forms that can be taken through that way.
I certainly don't smoke or vape my antibiotics or any other medicinal compound that I might get a prescription for.
But you might need to put some CBD in your puffer, actually.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So yeah, and there's no doubt it's a very efficient way to get it into the bloodstream. So yeah, it's not ruling out that vaporization or some form of inhalation medical inhaler is not, there will be uses for it in that form, particularly for rapid onset use. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to steer the conversation to a bit of a different direction, but I know that you, through your work with MCIA, have I think played a bit of a role in working with government around advertising of medicinal cannabis. I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, we have doctors and the public who, I would say, I'm generalizing here and I mean no disrespect, but it's not that they're deliberately uneducated, that it's just so hard to educate them because there are restrictions in place. I know that there's fewer restrictions for doctors, say, but even still, it seems to be an emerging field, the education of doctors in becoming authorized prescribers and the like. And then, of course, there's the general public who, it seems, have to resort to underground forums on Facebook, Reddit, in order to just exchange in a very free-flowing manner information about their experiences with clinics, with products. What's your thought on the current state of advertising prohibitions in Australia? And I appreciate the difficult position you're in as a conduit between the industry and government, but do you have thoughts around how we could improve that to provide for better education?
Yeah, look, we do, and I think it's really important distinction to make. Doctors don't need educating, but they do need access to the right information, and so it's being careful to distinguish between that. In terms of, it's something that we've seen and knew was really important from an industry association perspective. And through the MCIA, we set up a medical advisory council, which is now chaired by Richard Di Natale, and in his role as a medico, but as an ex-politician. I don't know if they're ever ex truly, but he's playing a really important role in terms of providing opening the doors, which has been terrific to have the dialogue with the likes of the AMA, the RACGP, so the various colleges, but there are two that we've started the dialogue with, and Richard and the advisory council have done a tremendous job. And again, we were only talking about it yesterday with the minister's advisor as to how we can engage and provide ways and potentially different pathways for medicos to effectively to get a tick of approval around, at the moment under the special access scheme where they have to apply on a patient by patient basis or as an authorised prescriber, and we've seen changes happen through the TGA with that, which is good. So authorised prescribers previously had to get ethics approval before they could then be, and that was done on a product by product basis. The change that's been made recently is that they can now get a blanket ethics approval for up to 5 years, I think it is. They still have to get a sign off on a product by product basis, which interestingly is linked to TGO 93. So as that changes to require GMP, means that doctors will know that they'll have a product that meets the quality requirements as well. But in doing so, by opening it up so they've got blanket approval to work with medicinal cannabis as a group of products, and then tick off on a product by product basis changes that. So the idea of the council in talking to the TGA in particular, I think will bring forward, are there other ways that we can effectively get doctors approved that's not as onerous or time consuming for them? At the moment, it's still very inefficient. We want to remove the inefficiency, but give them the confidence that they can prescribe products and know how to and where to get information that they can then pass on to patients. So I think we will see this area improve, and doctors get ready access to information and then also to patients. So the prohibition on advertising, is something that has been problematic. We've seen some players flaunt it and run the gauntlet, and it's not helpful. It undermines confidence. We want to make sure that that's not the case. So I think it'll improve, and there's a lot of focus going into it.
Well, and that's an interesting point you raised just at the end there about those who don't necessarily play by the rules. And I look at that not only in the legal market, but also, of course, the many CBD oil, or they call it hemp oil providers, who are totally operating on their own. And I look at the environment in which we operate, or in which the industry operates, and it seems as though there is very little regulatory or enforcement action taken by the TGA. I'm not sure whether that's for lack of resources in that space or what the case might be, but it's certainly, you can see that for some people in the industry, there's not much to incentivize them against, advertising the way that they wish, because they know that they might just get an angry letter from the regulator or something like that. Do you think that,
or nothing at all?
Yeah, or nothing at all. Do you think that?
I think it is starting to change. It's it definitely is a resource thing, and when you look at COVID overlaid on it, the regulators in a really difficult position with everything that's going on. So they definitely have started to circle back though, and ensure that they've put their teeth in on a number of matters now, and I think that's been one of the things that I think people have been waiting to see is, are they actually going to take action, and is it of consequence? And yes, there have been a couple of cases now where it has been of significant consequence to players, and the idea of running the gauntlet, I think there's enough activity happening in that space, and when they do put their teeth in, it's going to be of significant consequence. So it is good to see what they've done, and I think they are working hard in the background with the resource they've got, and it is starting to play out now.
Well, yeah, and hopefully, we see just good practices across the industry as a whole. Well,
that's just for the industry though. So you can go on Instagram and search CBD oil Australia and find as many as you like in terms of people operating completely outside the scope of the industry, or at least the legal industry.
I'm sure all of them are TGO 93 and GMP compliant products.
Yeah, some of them say that actually, which is funny as fuck.
Yeah.
But you can almost employ somebody as a social media manager at the TGA or ODC and just sit on the hashtags.
That did come up yesterday. Yeah. So yes,
oh really? Okay.
Yeah, no, they are keeping an eye. Well, they're aware of it. We've drawn it to their attention as well. But you're right. It's a bit like whack-a-mole, where they take action on one and they just pop up under another page somewhere else. So
yes, totally.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, Peter, I'm just curious to know, timelines wise, how close I know that already Cann is producing at the undisclosed other Victorian facility, but I'm
undisclosed Mildura that you mentioned.
No, well, that's the other one. I'm trying to be coy about this.
It does remain, it's undisclosed but not unknown.
I was going to say, I hope that when you're driving in those parts that you know where it is. But yeah, with regard to the one in the Mildura region, how far away are we from seeing that begin to get going?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. So we've employed and are actively employing at the moment, but in parallel with the cultivation facility setting up, we've got a GMP lab, and we're commissioning at the same time our extraction capability up there as well. So all of that's happening in parallel, and touch wood, COVID allowing, we're on track to have plants in the facility by the end of this calendar year. So
brilliant.
There's no doubt COVID's throwing up some curveballs. As you probably know, today was our 200th day of lockdown in Melbourne since it started. So yeah, it's been a hell of a journey to be on. But so far we've managed to keep things moving up there, and it's really exciting. And I dare say, and I'm hoping we will have a ribbon cutting and get some opportunity to show people what we're doing without disclosing any of our security steps up there. But it'll definitely be something that will be a standout capability to have here in Australia for Australian patients.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Fantastic.
Well, we're excited to watch all that unfold. But Mitch is just frozen there. All right. Well, we might wrap it up there.
I've got a tendency of doing that.
We might finish up here, but want to just say thank you so much, Peter, for your time.
We've lost Andrew, it looks like. But
goodness me. And Mitch just.
Who are we losing here? We're all, this is COVID. I blame COVID. If anything goes wrong,
in parallel universes. But barring that bit, which we'll edit, we just want to say thank you very much, Peter, for joining us on today's AltMed episode. We know how busy you are, and we really appreciate your time. We're super excited to see what unfolds with Cann. So we'll be watching,
and MCIA,
of course.
But I'll end on one question, which we like to ask certain people when they come on the show, is when, if ever, do you see recreational adult use cannabis happening in Australia outside ACT, of course, because they're only going to do it.
There is a special case there, yes. So, yeah, look, I think it's interesting in terms of establishing a medical pathway and industry. Recreational would actually just be a distraction. I think we saw that in Canada. It completely distracted them and blew things up for everyone. But look, it's not off the cards, but it's not driving our business or business model or the industry itself. I think there's no doubt there's recognition, and it's one of the reasons why cannabis is generally regarded as safe. I think when you look at the safety profile, it's one of the reasons why there is, I think, confidence around the use of cannabis, opening that up fully to either decriminalisation and then a full recreational market behind it. I think is just a bit of a distraction, and I'm not sure that under the UN convention that we're operating here in Australia that there's any federal appetite to head down that path. It's just I think it sits in the too hard basket, and on that basis, it's
interesting.
Probably at least 5 years away, in my mind, if not longer.
So certainly not in the short term will we see the Mildura facility operating a bit like a winery where people can just sort of drive in, try a few, do a tasting, if you will. Won't be seeing any of that.
No, we're not going to be hanging our shingle out the front, that's for sure.
Very good. Well, no, thank you, Peter. We'll be watching the Cann Group journey and watching all your great work with MCIA with interest, and I'm sure we're probably due to cross paths in person at the United in Compassion symposium that has been postponed.
We would have met there, but other than that, hopefully we can have you come along when we do cut the ribbon in the Mildura facility. So
we would love that.
Keen to keep you abreast of where we get to and what we're doing with it all, for sure.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right. Well, until the next time we speak, Peter, we'll take care and we'll speak soon.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.
Thanks, Mitch. See you guys.